The Federalist Papers, 85 essays written between 1787 and 1788, represent one of the foremost distillations of American thought. They were produced as a joint effort by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay under the shared name Publius. Their project was to advocate for the adoption of the newly proposed Constitution and to defend it from its detractors. And they had good cause to do so. It is often forgotten that the Constitution was written during the summer of 1787 under the utmost secrecy. No one outside the room where it was written knew for certain what type of government was being constructed. So when the finished Constitution suddenly became public and people were forced to consider submitting to this new supreme law of the land as it was presented with no further changes, it was a little bit overwhelming, especially considering that the body that became known as the Constitutional Convention officially had only the authority to modify the existing governing framework, the Articles of Confederation, but had instead gone ahead and discarded it completely, writing something entirely new. In other words, a lot of explaining needed to be done. And thus is the context under which Hamilton, Madison, and Jay were quickly composing the Federalist Papers. Now, just how successful was their enterprise exactly? Truthfully, it is widely acknowledged that the Federalist Papers likely had low impact in their own time. They were published in New York newspapers, which had little circulation outside of that state, and by the time New York narrowly voted in favor of the Constitution, enough other states in the Union had already adopted it as to trigger its universal ratification anyway. Nevertheless, the Federalist Papers retain other value that should not be understated. They provide a valuable commentary on the Constitution and American political philosophy writ large. The authors occupied key positions in the early republic and shaped the course of United States history. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury and the architect of the nation's first national bank. He was the ideological foil to Thomas Jefferson on government, law, foreign policy, and economics. James Madison drafted the Bill of Rights. He was the fifth Secretary of State and the fourth President. John Jay was an accomplished diplomat, second Governor of New York, and first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Taken as a whole, the Federalist Papers offer a window into the minds of the founding generation. The articulation of political principles and Republican sentiments within the essays is, without qualification, priceless. I hope to explain them in their entirety, which as of recording this, has been seemingly yet to be accomplished on YouTube. Let us begin. Federalist Number 1 was written by Alexander Hamilton. At the outset, Hamilton quickly establishes the historical importance of the momentous decision facing the reader in 1787. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. Hamilton is referring here to the fact that up to the 18th century, it was exceedingly rare that a people could chart their own course and consciously create their own government. For the most part, throughout history, the course and form of a nation's government was more a product of reactions to events and circumstances, rather than from careful deliberation. Crudely put, making it up as you go along, versus defining the scope, powers, and justification for a government beforehand. This is, in essence, the American experiment. Could we come together and shape a nation around Enlightenment principles and ideals? Continuing on, Hamilton takes note of certain groups that will oppose the ratification of the Constitution. He says that people who stand to lose power, people who see opportunity in confusion, and people who will profit from the dissolution of the Union all have a vested self-interest in the failure of the Constitution. Hamilton moderates himself, however, caveating that there are those who will resist the Constitution due to ill-considered reasoning and misconceptions as well. He even goes further than that, writing, "So numerous indeed, and so powerful are the causes which serve to give a false bias to the judgment, that we, upon many occasions, see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society." In other words, even people who come to the correct conclusions, even people who will support the Constitution, can get there for the wrong reasons and through poor methods of thinking. Therefore, a spirit of moderation, tolerance, and humility is absolutely necessary from all sides in this debate. From here, Hamilton anticipates how his opponents will behave and what they will say. He thinks that the pro-Constitution Federalists, because they advocate for a stronger central government, will be characterized as fond of despotic power and hostile to the principles of liberty. Hamilton thinks that such arguments are essentially vacuous populism bait. He asserts that a disproportionate guarding of liberty breeds distrust, and an excessive fidelity to the people forces us down a road that begins with demagogues and ends with tyrants. Hamilton contends that in all actuality, the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty. Hamilton readily admits to the reader that his mind is clearly made up in favor of the Constitution, and he does not intend to pretend otherwise. His job as Publius is to convince the reader of his conviction that it is in their greatest interest to adopt this document. He concludes Federalist No. 1 by mapping out subjects he wishes to be covered in other forthcoming essays. These are largely centered around proving the utility of the Union, as he says, especially in the face of those who would prefer the separation of the states. The latter circumstance, Hamilton intends to argue, heralds only danger and destruction. And with that, we have finished the first video in my Federalist paper series. What do you think about the arguments in this essay? I certainly look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a good one.